Hello and welcome again. I'm so excited to continue our conversations about tech, women in tech. And this conversation I'm very excited about because it really talks about STEAM. It's a little bit different than STEM. And as many of you know, I come from an arts background and have transitioned now into studying sciences and embracing my identity as a women in tech and women in STEAM and as Google Women Tech Makers Ambassador. But I don't think I've really taken on STEAM. And so I'm excited about this conversation today because I probably really should be owning that identity because I have such a deep background in the arts and a passion for that. And now with my work in STEM. So I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Philippa. I completely agree. You are what I'll call a STEAM diva. So, hi, my name is Chioma Aso. I am a Women Tech Maker Ambassador. I'm also a founder and president of the STEAM Divas Inc. STEAM Divas Inc. is a nonprofit that is focused on building female STEM leaders. And we do this by giving the young girls hands-on experience, and we use arts and mathematics as the vehicles to introduce them into that. We're not only focused on them getting the experience, but we want to also get them in a place where they are in a safe environment and they can be their authentic self. So that's kind of major for us because we want to encourage diversity, but we don't want everyone to be coming as diverse but end up becoming like everybody else. So that's our focus.
I love that. That is wonderful. And I think the hands on part is so incredibly important, just sort of in terms of a family background. One of the things is my grandfather, my father's father, was a principal. And so being an educator was kind of his life work. And he did a really good job with his own son. He was a very committed, like if they didn't teach Latin in school or they taught Latin but they didn't teach Greek, he was making sure like he had everything he needed
Hmm.
to pursue an education at Cambridge. And so that was, very much part of his drive. But the actual school that he taught at in England was very much focused on the non-academic students and making
Oh,
sure that because that in England they sort of test you out early, you're going to go A levels or O levels, and you're either going to go on an academic track or a trade track. And he taught at the trade school, but he made sure that the ones that had that academic that they could kind of cross over and they could kind of move ahead. But the biggest thing that my dad sort of taught me is that how they taught biology was they taught gardening, how they taught, so many things just were that were very practical. And I think sometimes we kind of miss that when we sort of track people arts or sciences,
right.
is that how much our whole world is about science. We live in a world that has gravity and measurement and rules and but there's so much still to discover and that is actually a creative process.
That's correct. That's really correct. I mean, STEM without creativity is just dud, right? And I'm not one that goes with like, okay, it has to be science and STEM because I believe everything has balance. I feel like addition of arts within STEM will give it its fulfillment, and addition of science within arts will give it its complete fulfillment. And going back into the conversations around hands-on, this is how I started. When I was growing up, I had messed around a lot with my mom's radio and TV. She had this radio and TV around, and I was always curious, and I end up breaking them. And she would get somebody to come home and repair it, and I'll be hanging around them to figure out how they do it. And then I break it again and fix it myself. And so the hands-on experience did keep me going. And it moved past the fluff of, okay, do you know what V equals to IR is? Because now I kind of have a way of understanding how signals work that are created by my own self. Now, that being said, that's kind of like the experience I wanted most of the students on STEAM Divas to learn, because when they grab that hands-on experience and they get into school and they encounter some of the hardships that come in with science subject because they think differently, then in that aspect, they can now remember, hey, I was actually good at this hands-on stuff, so this is not a discouragement for me. It did help me a lot too, because when I was in school, I struggled with some classes, but I always remember that I can do this because I had done something on my hands and gotten some results out of it. So I do have a reason why I built the curriculum around STEAM Divas the way it is, based on my personal experience. And when it came to the introduction of arts, I was trying to get a lot of girls that felt like science is not from them because, like you said, they when I was in that growing up, they made us pick a side. Like, you're gonna be science or arts, pick one. And I mean, I'm just like, I like all of this, right? And so I thought we are missing out on a lot of creativity by forcing people into these boxes. Because if you think about it, when in science, most times people say you're being logical, and then the arts and humanity, they say you're being creative, and that forces sometimes when we're working in environments where people cannot think outside the box. And true solutions come from when we immerse creativity within the logical space.
Very, very much so. And I think there's a couple of things in, well, I guess similarities in the arts. I mean, in the arts, there's communication. And I find that so many of the incredibly talented scientists that I am now encountering in my studies and in my work are lacking that confidence and that ability to know how to get their ideas out,
Hmm.
to all the great things that they've discovered and researched. It's like getting a stage to be able to share that,
Hmm.
and also to be visible, that other people can see them and they can stand as the role models that they are.
Hmm.
I think the visibility part is really important. And I've just found myself in so many rooms where I have made an effort to sit on my hands and not be the first to speak, because I'll always be the first to speak. I have no problem with that. But I
Yeah.
always want to create sure I'm creating space for other people, and that encouraging other people to speak up and participate, and knowing kind of when to make sure that whoever's leading the group knows they can always rely on me to fill the space, but that I'm not going to take up all the space. It's
Yeah.
really important to me that other people feel comfortable and sharing their ideas, and that to me is part of creativity, is also a confidence. I mean, one of the things you get in improv is yes and
Yeah.
whatever comes at you, it's like, I'll figure it out. So there's a sense of resilience, there's a sense of adaptation, there's a sense of collaboration that you get from the arts.
Right. And I think that there is so much more than just communication, right? What do arts bring in, aside of the creativity and innovation? Arts connects with human. And we keep designing things for humans, but trying to be logical. Art is gonna be the key thing that allows us to be able to create more human-centric design. Because there whenever you think about a part when we as humans we're experiencing certain things, right? Like emotions, like grief, some of the important things that makes humanity happen. The easiest way we express it, or the things that comfort us, is usually tied around the arts. Like, you watch a movie, or you listen to a poem, or you listen to music, right? So there's something very human about art, and bringing it into the sciences allows us to do better job in designing human centric things. Also, arts allows us to be more culturally and ethically aware, because when you listen to the way people talk, you go you understand the words behind things that are being said, because I can have several words to express certain things, to express what I want to say. And to be culturally and ethically aware allows you to be able to build systems that allows us to save the world, like socially responsible automation or socially responsible robots, rather than just looking at the numbers and saying, yeah, we got this done, and not figuring out how it affects everything else around there. Also, with the art, it does encourage your ability to think interdisciplinary and solve problems from a global perspective. The reason is because, like, if you think about something like robotics, where it's bringing in so many dimensions into one space to build something, having a skill in understanding creativity, understanding the arts allows you to be able to be good at solving so many of those things. So these are very important things about the arts that exceeds just, just looking at, because every time you say art, people are thinking about paintings and all that. But if you think about deep down inside of us, arts evokes certain things within us that you cannot logically explain away, but it changes so many things about you that makes you human. So imagine imbibing that within your design, then you take your creativity to the next level.
Well, I think you bring up a really important point, and too is a lot of the world sometimes there's respect for very successful artists, but there's oftentimes not a lot of respect for the aspiring artist. It's sort of the, well, you need a real job. And I apologize. But the idea that everybody is really important. If it's a campfire, we need our scientists and our doctors and our engineers, but we also need our artists and our storytellers. And because if you had a world without books or music or art or fashion, what would we be? It's how we connect, it's how we evolve, it's how we interpret the world, it's how there's just so much value in that.
Right. Right. And I think we all know this, because at the end of the day, when you're going through something that you cannot logically explain, like a death, you need the arts to help connect everything. So being a creative person, being someone that wants to do something different, being someone who likes to think outside the box, I enjoy the ability to bring the arts within the STEM, because that's what makes me take the next level, right? And I can give an example with how, since there's a CS Week, I want to tell you like how I feel like even doing things like programming is very artistic, right? Because you know people think, yes, there is a whole lot of logic within it, but there's a creative space that comes into solving this problem in such a way that it's an art, and you move from the dimension of I'm just solving a problem to I'm creating solutions to things that people want to see. So now you when I started programming, when I started in school, I was an electrical engineer. That's what I started in school. And at that point in time, computer engineering was coming up in my school. So they added the department for computer engineering, but they merged it together with the electrical engineering group. And I ended up learning how to program from that situation. I got into, we started out with assembly language, and then we got into C++, and I loved it. Now, mind you, my passion has always been robotics, and I've not had opportunity to be able to do anything with robotics, because robotics is something out there. People talk about it. It's still a growing field. And I just said, well, electrical engineering is as close as I could get to it. Well, when programming came into play, I said, wow, I can make my robot do things, because what software does for us, it allows us to be able to communicate with a machine in the way that we communicate with ourselves, right? So hardware, you make it do certain things, and then the software allows you to automate or make the machine do the things you want to do. So I'm like, I can, this is as close as robotics as I could get, right? Now, mind you, it's new. Everyone's like, you have to pick one. You got to go between engineering, hardware engineering. You got to go to software engineering, whichever one. I was like, no, I want to do both. And all of this is part of the reason why emerging arts into STEM is not different for me, because I was like, yeah, just like with programming, I was like, I want to do both. I'll do both, and I stuck with it. Fortunately for me, when I left school, I got into building automated systems, which allowed me to use my hardware to and my software. And that's why I'm like, sometimes you just gotta stick with your guts. I was like, okay, now look, I found something, right? I found something that would allow me to use both of the things that I love. And I said building automated systems. And that's as close as you can get to robotics at that time, which is still, automation. And it was allowing me to be creative in the space of using my program to communicate with my machines, and then allow my machines with my hardware to allow to communicate with the real physical world. So that's how I was able to immerse both of them. So programming is art to me. And I always find it funny because people will come to me and they'll be like, yeah, are you doing engineering and all that? I'm like, my job is actually an engineering leader. My hobby though, it's it's programming and things like that, because that's where I allow my mind to just take on a logical path, and it frees up space about things that's overwhelmed. And I think people do it with writing, and people do it with right, and listening to music. They allow a part of their brain to function differently so their mind can ease up on whatever thing else is going on. So for me, because program is art to me, I just enjoy you know looking at other people's program or watching the way people build other hardware. And that's something I do all the time. If I go somewhere and I see someone's hardware, I'm thinking in my head like, oh, how did they make this work? And I'm breaking it down because I'm seeing the artistry within the space. And I'm like, this is beautiful. I bought parts that I don't need, but just because the way they designed it was beautiful. And just being able to create that connection between being an artist, because I love painting, I love listening to music, and then bringing it into the space where STEM, and I treat it like an artist too, like, oh, this is beautiful work. So I can look at the program and I can guess what it's trying to do because I can see the artistry around it. It does make me a stickler for, like, okay, if you're gonna use braces, make sure you make a tab in there. But it's the art for me, and it makes me enjoy what I do. So I can just imagine if we have built a society of people who can merge the artistry into the STEM, it changes things. Well, let's focus about getting STEM jobs to go ahead and make money. Like you said, how you're like, oh, aspiring artists, you do real work, but rather we will be admiring the thought process behind how they came to this, and we can take that and put it into real world situations that we need solutions for, but we can't think outside the box.
Very, very much so. I think that one of the things for me is tech is just another tool in my toolkit. And so that's where I started, as I felt like I was very much tracked on a artistic path. But when I got to college, and it was the early 90s, there was HTML, and I was like, oh, I can build a website. And I started coding. I had no idea that that was a thing, or that I could then pursue a computer science degree or become a developer, or
Mhm.
I just was like, oh, it's a skill that I have. And then as I went forward and did a lot of marketing, I could be on any team. And if they needed a website, this is long before they had the sort of turnkey ones, but you actually had to code it. I was always the one on the team to build things. If we were ever had a project and it was going from idea to execution, I was always the one being like, oh, okay, no problem. I'll build it. I'll figure it out. And is that tech? Is that creative? To me, it was always wanting to be part of a solution and being very concrete. Another thing I kind of get from my dad is he often will say, you need to pick between, are you a strategic leader or are you an operational leader? And I had just finished a leadership class where I was actually very pleased to hear them say, you can be both. And it really is important to be, and that's very much how I am. I love strategic thinking, but I'm very operational. I'm like,
Mhm.
let's get it down to brass tacks. Let's get it done. What does it we need to actually build it? And that is both a creative and a science kind of mind.
Yeah. I think that for you to be able to use your mind to its fullness, I know they say it's one is right brain, now the other is left brain. I don't know how true that theory is, but I think that the mind itself requires both for you to be able to get it working. I don't think it's opposites. I think that as an artist, if I was I am an artist, as an artist, and if I get in some of the logic that comes in with building STEM, I can create solutions with my art while bringing in full on creativity, because that's pretty much what I do on the other side. It's just I'm just leaning more clearly towards the sciences. I can imagine someone who is an artist who, like you mentioned, building a website, and you're like, I want to build a website, and how can I get this website to be pleasing to people. These are means of going into programming that does not follow the traditional way. And you have to realize that someone came up with this by thinking outside the box, and suddenly we have user-centric UX design as a career and all of that stuff. How did this happen? Because someone's creative juice was spilling out, was allowed to be. And I think that one of the reasons that we see a situation where someone like you was pretty much pushed into art, or maybe you just felt like this is easier, is because we don't have diversity within the STEM field. So we're seeing a lot of people thinking in one directional process, and the possibilities are not allowed to exist. And which is part of the reason why I'm so focused on having females in STEM. I want female STEM leaders because they're going to bring in thoughts and minds and ideas that we don't allow. Imagine that you're sitting somewhere right now and someone said, how is it that I can get to the next level of science like you were doing? And someone says, oh, don't worry about it. You like colors too much. I think you should go focus on art, and you would be like, yeah, this is easier. And I've seen this happen with a lot of women saying, oh, this is easier. I don't really understand the logic that's in sciences because the environment was not created for us. And so it's very easy for us to go where it is. That's why representation matters. When you see people that look like you, you're like, I can do it, and things like that. So whenever I go into or talk to a lot of young women or talk to women in engineering, half the time they're talking about imposter syndrome. And I'm like, the number of people with imposter syndrome is just too much for this to be normal. Could it be possible that we're existing in environments that were not created for us? So we feel like an imposter, but we're not an imposter. We are supposed to be there. The environment itself needs to be changed. And so we start seeing that once people understand that the job is not for you to do as part on yourself, but the job is for you to do on the environment, I feel like then we start creating equalities where we're creating environments where everybody can exist as they are.
I think that is so important. And I think another piece of this is, and again, this a lot I think has to do partially with parenting and partially with teachers and role models. I think that sort of that mix, because I feel like for a lot of times people coming up through elementary school, middle school, high school, there's a lot of looking at your community, at your role models, at your parents and their expectations. I interview so many people who are Women Tech Maker ambassadors who have a South Asian background. And it was, are you going to be a doctor or are you going to be an engineer? The idea of being a creative artist was never kind of in their options. And they're very focused on math and science in their education. So tracking into college, going into software engineering or any kind of engineering is kind of very natural. And sometimes they have to break parent expectations who wanted them to go into the medical field and they've chosen the computer field. And that's a big sort of, they have to even own their confidence to make those kind of transitions based on parent expectations and cultural expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you look at American media, we tend to sort of make the person who knows math the geek, the unpopular person. We don't add a lot of social power to being good at math and science. Mm-hmm. That's actually, you're the outcast. You're mm-hmm. the standalone. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the problem I'm seeing, especially with the U.S. education, is that I feel like a lot of these subjects are taught isolated, like without an actual application. So a lot of kids are left thinking, I don't see how this applies. I don't see why I would ever need math in the real world. Mm-hmm. And I think that what happens is you then also lose your path in your way in, because, like, for example, I was looking at the Viterbi Engineering School at my university at USC. And they're very clear, like you can only pursue any of their software engineering degrees if you have an undergraduate in math and in science. And so I feel very fortunate that I found GIS, which is Geographic Information Science, because it's so intersectional that it was a place and a way in that I could get into the sciences without being excluded for not having had a concentration in math in high school and a concentration in math in my undergraduate. And I feel like sometimes for some people, like if you don't get in on that path early, you're excluded from the path.
Mm, I agree. I see that a lot. Going back to what you said about, how the media portrays people who, do sciences, as part of the reason why I'm particular about looking good. Because I want a lot of women when they see me and also understand that I'm an engineer, that I'm okay, being fashionable, showing up, looking great. Because I noticed that sometimes when you come in looking great, the first thing, there's always an assumption that you don't know what you're doing. So I've seen a lot of women get into the spaces, and instead of chasing their creativity, wear, because I wear a lot of colors, and just being their real self, they're like trying to be like the geek they see on TV, right? They're like, I've heard them make some comments to me like, "Oh, you wake up in the morning to do your makeup. Oh, you got time." I was like, "I always have time for me." That's a fact. I mean, and it was almost like propagated, like, you have to not care about yourself to be really smart. And I was like, no, I have time for me. I show up, and when I'm in environments with men and women, I talk about fashion. I make sure my conversations is as diverse as I could make it without sounding overtly serious or too out there, like I can exist in this world. When I write my articles on robotics or articles on anything that's technical, I make sure I infuse things around it that is completely, you know, part of our social connection. You know, like something you can talk about. I would talk about. I'll connect it to a music, or I'll connect it to a scene. Something we use around the neighborhood, right? And so I'm trying to show, and this is kind of like what I do. I connect dots. I'm trying to show that everything in this world is already existing somewhere. We just have to connect the dots. Makes it easier to learn it. So now, when you tell me about um, co- a, a university saying, "Oh, we don't want people to come in because they didn't do math," that is ridiculous. Everybody does math every day. I know people would say like math is so out there. Math is the short form of English. When we speak English, you just say, "Oh yeah, one person met with the other person, and now we had two persons." I could go through all of that sentences, or I could say one plus one is two, and that would be it. Or I could be like 1p plus 2 plus 1p is equals to 2p. I could do it that way, or I could use summation notation and say sigma is, as 1 10 source 2, and write it that way. It's just the way it is. Math is a summation. It's a very simple way of us, expressing things that we say in long form. The funny thing is that a lot of women that I talk to, especially women that I talk to that say they don't know math, I go with them to the store and they see something that's on sale. And before I could even mathematically follow my logical way that they taught me in school to solve a math problem on how much the sale is going to be, they're like, "Oh, yeah, you're going to save $2 here if you buy this one. This is a better deal." And the other, and I'm like, "How are you doing this?" Because I'm still solving it, right? Because they've figured out a way to solve a math problem. But because they're not sitting down in classrooms and doing the 1 plus 1 is equals to 2, therefore is this, they feel like they don't know math. But everybody does math. So the question I will ask a university like USC that is saying, "Oh, you need math," how about creating an opportunity for somebody to learn the math that they need for the next level of what you're going to teach them? Because they have their own way. They've You can't exist in this world without math. You can't. The same way you can exist in this world without learning a language. So we put things within boxes, and then we get confused that we're not, things are not changing, or we're not bringing our best selves. I think that's crazy, because I've seen people, I've gotten ideas from some people who are definitely not in the science track, And it's because they are not even held back by some of the rules and laws that I know. And I'll be telling them like, yeah, why don't you do something like this? And I'll be like, yeah, you know what? You're right. Let's try that. And I think that is what we call the power of diversity. Diversity is not, let's call up this place, or bring in a female so she can come and be taking notes. No, diversity is the ability to be able to get in ideas so that everybody can think differently because someone brought in something new. And so we are missing out on the power of that when we start restricting, like, oh, you need to know math before you go here. Maybe we need to figure out a way to teach stuff so that everybody can imbibe it the way they're comfortable with.
Absolutely. I think if you took any subject that someone was interested in, whether they like fashion, they like shopping, they like makeup, they like construction, it doesn't matter to me. If you take anything, they like cooking, it doesn't matter. Take something you're interested in and then do math around it. You will find that suddenly those calculations and those measurements, it makes so much sense because you're so motivated in that direction. I remember doing my trigonometry class in high school, and it was so disconnected from any application in the real world. They just would not tell you how you would ever use this. But I learned it, and I was fine understanding the calculations and the sines and the cosines. And then I had a summer internship right after that class, and I remember asking the owner of the company. It was a digital editing house, and how does this technology work? I've always been fascinated by technology and an early adopter to technology. And he said, well, it's really hard to explain because you'd have to understand trigonometry. And I was like, I just took that class. Why did they not tell me that at the beginning of the class, that these things have applications? And at that time, video was very interesting to me. It still is. We're here on video. And that this is something that I was deeply passionate about. And I would have found a much deeper connection to it if I understood it.
Right.
People I hugely admire now in my space as I'm studying spatial data sciences are saying, you should know calculus. It really just helps you think in a different way, and it will help in just, it's really valuable. And other people are saying, if I had anything I could teach you that I would want you just to know more of, it's statistics. And so that's why I'm so grateful. I'm like, I've got Khan Academy. I can self-study these things, or I can find some study groups, or I can take some courses. Like, there is no knowledge out there that I can't figure out and that I can't lean into and I can't show up to learn. I'm not afraid of anything. That's one thing I know. I'm not afraid. I'm excited. Sometimes you just have to pace yourself because there's a lot of knowledge out there.
Right.
But one thing that I thought was interesting about statistics, and the example that this one particular speaker gave about why he thought it was so important, is that he would have a class where he put his students into two groups, and he'd give them each group a task, and he'd leave the room. And basically what it was is one group had a real coin, and their job was to flip it and write on the board, heads or tails, flip it 100 times, and write your results on the board. And the other group was tasked with a imaginary coin, and they were meant to flip it 100 times and write their results on the board. And he said he'd come back in the room, and he always knew exactly which group was which, because human nature, the group that had the imaginary coin would always come up with the consensus that after 2 or 3 times one way, they had to sort of imaginarily flip it the other way because they believe the world is fair.
Right.
And the actual real coin would go 13, 20 times heads before it would flip. And so understanding statistics sort of also understands how data actually is versus how we think it should be.
Right. That's interesting that you talked about statistics because I love stats too. But I use it in a real word when I'm talking about relationship. That's how I do my things. Like, I always connect it to something in the real world. Like, if I talk about RF, I talk about it in relationship or something crazy. But statistics is something that I always enjoy, because like I said, people always think that life is fair. And stats is like, no, it isn't. However, I can give you close probability. So, I always make a joke with my friends when we talk about, the dating scene. and how you can find good people. I was like, there's probably one or two. So keep dating. Like, let's say you have 100 men and you dated 10 of them out. So now your stat is like, you reduce it down to 90. So now you have a greater probability of finding that one. And then so I was like, and I'll be giving them 0.9, but now that 0.9 becomes 1. So now your statistics of finding one is now 1 out of 9. So your number gets so, and they'll be laughing because I'll be breaking it down mathematically. And it's just like understanding, like, when you are programming and you have this clarity like in your head where you're thinking, oh, this is how things are supposed to work, right? Like you talked about the people with imaginary cone. You limit yourself. You limit yourself, and you limit your creativity, right? And that's where the whole ability to be able to think outside the box comes into play. I completely agree with your concept about you can learn anything. You can learn anything. And I think that most times people make the mistakes of learning stuff instead of learning their learning style. Learning your learning style is the thing you should be focusing on. And then you exercise your learning style by learning something. So basically, if your learning style is my learning style, I think my learning style is connecting dots. And I have a tendency of always reading a lot of things and gathering that data, and eventually I'm going to connect the dots somewhere. So whenever I'm exercising my learning style, like I'm learning something new, maybe the first 5 classes, I don't understand what they're saying, but that I don't give up because I know eventually I'm going to connect the dot. So once I connect the dot, I go back to the remaining 5 classes that I didn't understand, and everything starts making sense. So when people understand their learning style, then you're not understanding at the very beginning. You say, okay, I'm going to make adjustments to my learning style, and that will help me get what I need to get. You don't give up and say, this is not for me. And that is why I think you're able to say, I can learn a lot of things, because you understand your learning style. And I find it very sad when people give up on learning because they are meeting a teacher who's teaching maybe like 50 students and has to teach the way they teaching style, and they can't really get to everybody's learning style. So you have to know your learning style and say, maybe I'm auditory, maybe I'm the kind of person that like to listen rather than participate. So I would maybe record this, participate in class, but then later on I'll go and listen it, because then that's when I get it. Maybe I'm the kind of person that like to write while I'm hearing, so I can do this. So understanding your learning style is what I feel it should be the focus. People understanding their learning style, like what is the thing I'm interested in? How is this subject connected to this thing I'm interested in? Is there a way I can connect the subject to the thing I'm interested in, even though it's not already existing, and make sure that it works? Things like that. And that's how I read wide. I'm always learning and reading things. Like right now, I'm reading about neurology. I'm spending a lot of time understanding how the brain works, because it's helping me not just understand how I am, but it helps me with the way I want to design robots, because I want to design good humanoid robots. I want to understand how the human body works, which is the ultimate. I mean, the human body is so awesome. But I want to understand all of that. But am I a doctor? No. Am I learning it as a doctor? No. But I'm just curious, and I'm gathering this information. Maybe one day I'll be working on something, and the dots will just connect. And that's why I always propose that don't get caught up because you didn't get it here. Just keep going with it, and remember your learning style, and eventually you'll be able to connect the dots.
You remind me of a few things in there that I want to comment on. One was in doing a teaching course. We talked about how when you're designing that curriculum and you're designing evaluations, keep in mind the graph that is boredom versus anxiety. And you want to make sure that students kind of are, toe that middle line, that they're not bored, but you don't want to over anxiety them. And so it's finding that, sort of a healthy way that you can achieve a learning transformation because you're appropriately challenged. And so I think that that's something that, to not be afraid that you are going to be pushed because you're going to learn something you've never learned before. But
Mhm.
it's not meant to have you go into just complete panic. It's supposed to sort of toe a line that you're not going to be bored, but you are going to be challenged. And I think that leads to another thing that I see a lot in the American educational system. And a lot of people I talk to, there's this sense of what I call educational trauma, where something has happened that they make it mean something about themselves. Perhaps they didn't have a good teacher. Perhaps they didn't really understand or weren't supported in their own learning style.
Right.
And they start making it mean something about them. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I can never learn this. And I have an incredible passion for learning languages, but I haven't really gone deep. I go wide. And in going wide, one of the things I see is I love recognizing what I recognize. So I've been studying a lot of Russian and Ukrainian and learning Cyrillic. And there's a lot of letters that it's taken me a really long time to recognize and know how they're appropriately pronounced. And I didn't worry about it in the beginning. I'd focus on the ones that are the same as English. And then I'd, start learning like, oh, okay, that's what the little door left the P. Okay, they, instead of, they use their C's as S's, they use their B's as V's. And you start kind of adding to it. And so I think part of the reason is I think a lot of people, like, they'll see a math calculation, they'll freak out because I don't know what that means. It's just like focus on what you do recognize, focus on what you do learn. And then with Russian, there are so many words that once you get past the Cyrillic and you kind of can phonetically sound it out, you're like, restaurant, that's an English word. Okay, plage, I know a bit of French, that's a French word for beach. So you start recognizing things. Passport is passport. I mean, there's literally hundreds of words in most of the languages that are Germanic or Latin based that are similar to us because many of those words have been integrated into the American language. Yes. So if you're looking at French, if you're looking at German, if you're looking at Russian, you're going to see so many things that actually are very familiar. And then you can start building on that.
Right.
And I think that, it's easy to sort of say, oh, I don't know, and it's too foreign. But once you just lean in and start looking at it, it starts to make sense. And I think similarly, as I'm learning machine learning and AI and deep learning, there's a lot of big calculations that I don't know, but I don't need to know. I mean, some of it is just starting with the vocabulary of the math. What's regression? What's Bayesian? What's Boolean? Just starting to get the language,
right?
And that you start building that vocabulary. And I think really kind of anything that you get into, it's going to have a unique vocabulary,
right?
And so starting to learn that. So I think that I like to pick at things. Even when I look at Mandarin, I look for little things. Like I'm like, okay, boo. And there's a symbol for boo. And I get to play with ChatGPT and it teaches me languages. And because it speaks 77 languages. But if I look at boo, boo is no or not or negative. So I now recognize that symbol. And if I see it in a sentence, I can say, okay, something in that sentence is saying no or not. And so, I'm starting to like pick at it and sort of understand little things that I can see. And then I like looking at Dutch. Dutch is simply a mashup of English, French, and German.
Right. So you figured out your learning style. That's what it seems.
Yes, which is I am okay to just jump into things that I don't recognize a lot of the stuff, but I just scan it for what I do recognize. And then I keep building on that.
Right.
And I'm not afraid and I don't run away from what I don't recognize.
That's really awesome. I think, there's so much to unpack here. First I always say, like, if we judge our animals by the ability to climb a tree, the fish will be the dumbest, right? I mean, the fact that everyone doesn't do things the same way does not mean one person is smart, one person is dumb. It's just everyone doesn't do things the same way. Like this world was created for right-handed people. So you can imagine people who are left-handed and struggles that they have to deal with. And the world was created for people who wake up in the morning, and night owls, we had to, try to fit into this world. And so that whole concept of this person is dumb and this person is smart doesn't sit well with me. However, I think the most important thing here that everybody needs to take is do not be afraid of failure. I don't think failure is a bad word, or don't say, he who must not be named. I feel like failure is a part of life. If we think about us as people, our heartbeat goes up and down. If it goes steady all the time, we're dead. And just being successful all the time, you're dead. And the fact that, you're not failing means you're not learning anything. We all have to fail to go to our next level. When you fail, you learn, you grow taller than where you were because you learned something, and you fail again, and you grow taller than where you are. And it's just always going to be that way. So the concept that people are afraid of failing, or because there's this labels between being smart and dumb is ridiculous. How are you going to grow? Whenever I write a program and I run it and everything works great, I don't learn anything. But if I have, I get the screen. Oh yeah, there's the program broke or something. That's where I'll learn things. And I found out that I really love debugging. I enjoy it. A lot of people like, oh, I hate debugging. I guess maybe because of pressure, but I get it. But I love debugging because that's when I really learn how the code works or what is going on or with my hardware or why this is not working. That's when I go take things to the next level. And once I get to the next level, I'm learning more. So I have this concept I always tell everybody, that my mentees, anybody I'm talking to, I'm like, here's how I roll. I fail fast. I get to root cause. That means I need to figure out why I failed. I keep asking all the whys until I figure out the root cause. And then I implement a corrective action. That's how I learn. That's where I grow. And I repeat it again. And then when I get to that level, I'm failing again. I'm getting to root cause, implementing corrective action, and I'm repeating it again. Because that's how you grow. The fear of failure, which is usually very common, especially amongst women, is part of the reason why we don't see a lot of women in STEM. I find that in groups, the guys who are making C's, they are the loudest. They're so confident in their C's. And the girls who are making B's, they feel like, oh, this is not really for me because I don't make A's. When I put out a job rec to try to hire women, everything has to match for them. So I keep trying to change the description to make it possible for them to not get caught up. I'm like, okay, this is a nice to have, and this is the basic need, because for them everything has to match, right? And so you start seeing that they're either not in STEM or they're not applying for these jobs because they're not 100% fitting into the space. So it comes around with this fear of failure. Like we feel like we have to be doing it right all the time. And I don't know why most women, why it's women that have this thing. Maybe it's because of the way the world is built, right? But still, it just makes it difficult for us to be able to change the status quo with the mindsets of people fearing failure. How are we going to take risk? How are we going to do these things? Like we're not going to be able to do anything. So I love to challenge things. I love to push the boundaries. I love to see how far I can go with this thing. And if it fails, it fails. Okay, like what went wrong here? Let's try to get it solved. And it's okay. And I've got to the point where I'm comfortable failing. I feel like it's okay. I make my best stories come out of failures, and just sitting out and just being afraid of it makes you not to grow.
I think that you bring up really good points there, which is when I did my urban planning degree, I was a straight A student. And then through that, I discovered just GIS and data visualization. And I just realized that I really was interested in the technical aspects of things. And that led me to wanting to pursue a GIS certificate. And it was not for the same amount of effort was put in the transition. My first semester, I was a B student, and it was not for lack of trying. It was actually, I had to try extra hard, and it was really, it bent my brain because it was so new to me and I was not quite understanding it. And now it took me a while, and then I sort of started getting the routine of the papers. It was like, what's your study area? What was the data sets you used? What was your methodology? What were the results? What's the discussion? And making it so that it's replicatable. That was a big takeaway for science for me, is that other people can take whatever you experimented with, whatever you looked at, and they should, if you explain it well, they should be able to get the same results, or ideally better results if you talk about your discussion, your limitations, and what you've learned, and how, if someone were to run it again, where they could actually improve on your process. And that was a big takeaway of understanding, okay, this is what science is, this idea of replicatability and discovery and sort of having that sort of research area. So I was like, okay. But I had done an interview for women in GIS, and someone asked me, say, hey, this is a serious question. I am not joking here. Did you cry when you were learning the software? And my answer was yes, I did. And I think that that's where I come back to educational trauma, is that it is okay to get frustrated. It is okay to fall down a tech hole. It is okay to even cry, but it didn't make that crying mean anything about me. There was no imposter syndrome. There was no, I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. It was just I'm frustrated because reality is not meeting my expectation that this should be easier. But then it sort of got me to reset, like, who can I call? Where can I get a resource? Maybe I need to set up office hours with my professor. Maybe I need to reach out to a classmate. I'm an online student, so I don't just naturally kind of get to rub elbows with somebody saying, help, I don't know how to do this. I have to be more proactive in that. And I had to get my professor to like sit me down and just sort of say, how do I do a layout? I can't seem to find the resource to do that in any of our books. And it was the simplest thing, but unless you said it's here, 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 and here, because it was on 3 different tabs that were not intuitive to me until I saw it. And then I was like, okay, now I understand it. I just needed someone to walk me through that. And so I think that a lot of these things, again, if you have emotional educational trauma, it triggers it, because now you start to add meaning to that frustration.
Right. It's very interesting. You called it educational trauma. I've not really thought about it like that. Well, I can see how it can be traumatizing for a lot of people, when your experiences about something is different from your expectations, and the way it was handled, just throws you in the spiral. And every time you see something familiar, a fleeting shadow of it, you immediately travel down that time and space, and the way you felt. I think that, it's great that you said you cried. I think that people need to hear the stories. I failed before. I failed. I love math. Don't get me wrong, but I did advanced math and I failed it, and it was crazy because I was like, I know math. Like, why am I failing this class, right? And eventually, the curve got me through. The class curve got me through, but it was a really low grade, and it was in my head like, wow, this is something else. But I didn't let that deter me. I stayed with it. I failed the class, if you think about it, but I carved out of it. However, I remembered how I used to pass all the math. I remembered my hands-on experience working on things that I was interested in. So I didn't decide that, oh, because I failed this math class, or because I'm struggling with this stuff. I'm not an electrical engineer. I stuck through with it and I graduated with it. So when I'm at work and I'm experiencing hardship, maybe trying to solve a problem, hey, I'm just like, I failed math before. I've got my engineering degree. I can get through this. And I think the more I spent working, and I'm a seasoned engineer now, the more time I spent working in engineering, I failed so many times that I'm just comfortable with it. Like, I just like, hey, you know what? We're gonna have to fail this one time, and then we try to resolve this. How do we resolve this? I'm always excited about the debugging process. I love it. I Right now home, I'm building robots. I built so many robots. None of my robots I've ever built has worked like the way it's supposed to work and ended up going great. I always have to go back and fix something or manage something. So at this point in time, we're just gonna go with it the way it is, and there's something to be said about failures. It's something I feel like we need to create a culture that we're all comfortable with failing. We have to be, because if we're not comfortable with failing, we will not do anything. I've reinvented my career so many times.
Well, that's actually the most true to the arts. If you think about the successful artists, they all have that sort of career reinvention. And I think I have always felt incredibly comfortable with that, having sort of moved locations and having moved industries. There is this sense of the art of reinvention. And I think that has something to do with it. I also think when you talk about failure, there's a question of effort versus no effort. I think sometimes people perceive if you're an A student, you put in a lot of effort. And if you're a C student, you just didn't put in the effort. And I think it's okay to be the C student who put in the effort, who, really was like, okay, wow, this really stretches me. I just don't naturally think this way. This takes effort, and I'm going to sort of fall short of the expectation because I don't really quite get it just yet. But I'm willing to show up. I'm willing to put my best effort forward, and the grade will be whatever it will be.
Mm-hmm. I think even when you have a no effort situation, it just lets you know that, oh, okay, guess I have space to put in effort. And if and that's something I do with my kids too, because when they come up to me and say, oh, mom, somehow my kids end up being overachievers. I don't even know why. And they say, oh, mom, my grades, especially my daughter, my grades are not looking good. And I was like, did you do your best? Are you sure this was all you had inside of you and you gave it your best? And she says, yeah. I'll be like, yeah, then it is what it is. You've done your best, and that's what's important. And not the grades. And I want that for her, because she has the tendency to want to be perfect and have all A's and all of that stuff. And you can see that um the whole thing with failure is a myth. I think that sometimes people just need something to feel good about themselves. And if you feel like, and I think this was something you said, like how you learn, like when you're working on like, or you're trying to lose weight, people think that when they go, like, you go to the gym to work out, they want to focus on an area. That's not how it works. The best way that weight loss has worked for me, or trying to build a particular area, is focus on the area that loses the most fat quickly. If I focus in that area and I continue to focus in that area, the body starts looking for fat in other places, because that place is not all muscles. And it's like, okay. And then it starts attacking the other places. And because I'm seeing results in that area that my body usually loses weight fast, I'm even more encouraged to go to the gym. I think that everybody's body is different, and I'm bringing in, like, you see how I connect the dots. I connect the dots all the time. Where you go to the gym, you're like, okay, I want to get my abs right, and maybe your body is the kind of body that the abs is the last place that you lose weight in. But maybe your thighs, you quickly get that correctly. Just work on your thighs, because eventually all the fat in your thighs is gonna go, because that's the first place. And you keep working on your thighs, your body's gonna be like, okay, we kind of ran out of fat, so I'm gonna go look for somewhere else to go get fat in. And now you're encouraged because you see your thighs showing you results, and you keep going to the gym, but you're not looking at your stomach, because you're like, oh, this stomach, is the fat is still there. So I think that's the same way you can apply it in the world. Like we get into the situation where, like you just mentioning, we just have to look at what we're good at. I know what I'm good at, and that's very important for people to know themselves. I focus on what I'm good at, and then I end up being imbibing the other things that's around me, just because of my confidence is raised, because I'm focusing on what I'm good at, and I'm also learning the other things around me. They're recognizing that, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is where my effort, I can put 100% effort. I'm getting the C here. That's okay. And then you start having this level of peace around the things that you do. I wrote a book, my book is called Unlocking the Team Puzzle. It's focused on strategic team building. And I wrote the book right around that theory. Because when I'm as an engineering leader, I noticed that, especially at most certain, it depends on the company I've worked in. Every company has the people that they make their star boy. Like when you go to companies like Google or Amazon, you find out that they tend to push the early starters as their leaders. So they tend to hire around that area. They tend to bring people like that in. They tend to make people like that leaders. And what happens is that you start seeing the side effects of those behaviors affecting the way that they deliver the goods. However, I noticed that there were three productivity personalities that exist. And these three productivity personalities, there are early starters, there are deep divers, and there is the final finishers. And the early starters are the people who, when you come up with an idea, they're first to go, they're top of the line, they're right there. I'm an early starter, so I know. And then they're deep divers. Those people usually are very focused on getting key skills. They deep dive into things. And then there's the final finishers. They're the last to jump on the project, but they're the ones that finish up with a customer. So understanding how each one of my team works allow me to, put people in the particular parts of the project and mitigating those weaknesses with the right people at the right time. And so whenever I'm giving award or rewarding people on a project, I can reward my deep diver. I can reward my final finishers rather than just rewarding my early starter, because I know that if my deep diver was not there, that this project would not have succeeded. Because early starters, we have a tendency of picking up new projects, but do we finish it? No. We're picking up the next new project. So guess who's going through with it? The final finishes. Guess who's fleshing out those ideas that we came up with? The deep divers. So whenever I'm at work and I'm trying to say, hey, I want to give this person an award, I have to almost make a case for the deep divers and the final finishes, because they're not like the early starters. And I'm like, and you're wondering why your product does not get delivered all the time, because you're giving reward, and then you start forcing people who are deep divers or final finishers to adapt behaviors of early starters that is not even them. First of all, that's why they're not happy. Secondly, the side effects of having too many early starters will start showing in your company. So just being able to see like how diverse people are, just productivity personalities is what I called it, and understanding people's diverse productivity personalities. That's how I hire. I say, okay, I hired you. This is your strength. Focus on your strength. This is your weakness. Don't worry about it. I will mitigate it with someone else. Let's say, for example, you're the kind of person that comes up with ideas, but you don't know how to write things down. My next hire is going to be someone who knows how to take good notes, and I'm going to mitigate them with someone else. And then I create this machine. I call it a total machine, so that my group does not rely on one person. You have your strength, focus on it. Let me get somebody else to mitigate this, and that's how you're able to build products that are worthwhile having. And that's where you bring in diversity, and that's how I will be able to hire someone who is not a particular kind of STEM person, but has the ability to work within my group, because I'm looking for something to mitigate the weaknesses of the other person that's a particular STEM person.
Well, I'm a deep diver. I think I had a wonderful boss who really understood that about me. And he was very good at saying, hey, I need this to be short, quick, fast, or yes, you can take your time and go, whatever down whatever rabbit holes you want to go, because it's really important for me to understand the boundaries of something and then sort of fill it in. And I feel like that's just very much who I am, as someone who likes to make sure I'm doing everything compliantly. I understand the rules. I'm that middle of like fleshing it out. I think you sort of spoke to something that I thought was interesting. Talk about like what part of your body sort of responds the fastest and sort of go with that. I think that kind of resonated with what I was saying earlier about like when I'm looking at languages, I start with what do I recognize? And then once I've recognized everything, then I sort of build up from there. And it's like, okay, now what can I learn next? Because I have this sort of recognized, so it builds my confidence, it builds my success. And I think that also leads me to thinking through what you were saying about just I don't know, really understanding our learning styles and kind of how we work. Oh, I think the next big sort of learning curve I have is I wanted to do stuff in content and content creation for a while now, but it was only when I went to a conference for GIS. It was my first sort of user experience. It's the Esri user conference. And I went this summer and I found that out of tens of thousands of people that were there, I had earned my seat at the table. I now knew how to use the mapping software, spoke the language. I finished a year I finished my GIS certificate, and I was definitely on my way. And I found that I was the only one there who identified as a podcaster, a YouTuber, a blogger. And realized that I had been trying to put that away because I was like, oh, I'm in STEM now and I'm going to do this sort of science thing, and realized that's like, wait a second, there's a gap. There's a way that I can actually add value to this community. And it was after that that I really started this kind of these interviews and really saying, hey, let's bring people to this stage and let's talk more about GIS, about STEM, about women in STEM, about technology. And I just realized that I was like, oh, there's a place for me that is unique to me, because there really isn't anybody that that I've crossed paths with that has my 15 years of experience working in the entertainment industry and
Yeah.
has my 10 years of experience working in digital media and digital marketing, and then has, you know, made this transition into owning my identity. Not to say I was always I've always been an early adopter in tech. I've always been, you know, at least on the software side of things, you know,
Right.
just always using software, and now learning more about, you know, just coding and building things and customization. And so I think that all of that together has like sort of led me to say, okay, I want to do videos, but I still have a huge learning curve ahead of me. I mean, I mentioned my very first internship was at a video editing production house.
Mm-hmm.
Yet at the same time, now I'm, you know, many decades later saying, oh, I need to learn how to edit. But I'm also like, let's just start where we are. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
simple interviews that I can do, and then later as I go, I can go back and I can cut clips and I can add graphics and I can, you know, put some music in, and I can make it even better. But it was like, hey, let's just start where we are. I'm not going to wait to do these interviews until my editing is perfect. I'm just going to begin. And then as I go, I can always, as my skills improve, loop back to old content and keep sort of upgrading it.
That's very great. I mean, I'm glad you know your learning style, because my learning style is connecting dots. So sometimes I could be talking about something, and next thing I would just bring something so out of words, out of the world in there. It was funny. I wrote this article about how how rockets are autonomous robots, and I connected it to a relationship, controlling relationship, and it's always like that with me. I connect the dots to something I'm familiar with, or something I'm comfortable with, and I'm learning Japanese now, and the way I remember the symbols is with I have things in my head that I play, like uh a Toto is like younger brother, and it looks like this. It looks like an insect, like a dragon, and my in my language we say ototo, which is like an insect that is scary, and sometimes younger brothers can be like very bothersome. So I just connected it. So if you show me the symbol, I will know. So I'm one for connecting, and I will connect as wide. And because I understand that my learning style is connecting, I read a lot. I read all kinds of things. I have no limitations to what I can read or what I'm reading. My favorite things though is sci-fi, but I read a lot. I read all kinds of things. You just give it to me. I'm like, oh, let me read it. No, I even read when I'm not planning to read. But it's like, understanding your learning style takes you to gives you the ability to be able to keep learning. Then it allows you to figure out, what am I bringing into this group? Because like how you discovered that, hey, I mean, I'm coming with something different here. It doesn't exist. So this is me. So you're able to be authentically you, because the truth is we're all unique. There's nobody that can be us. Nobody can live your life the way you can. There is no you, and all the ideas that you have, and all the things that you're supposed to bring into, all the things you're supposed to innovate, all the things, changes you're gonna bring into the world, is if you don't do it, it's gonna die with you, because nobody else can do it, because there's no the combination of who you are does not exist. You got to think about it like a combination. People think that it's just a still thing. I said, no, it's just a combination of your experiences, a combination of your culture, a combination of your diverse inputs from wherever you've been at. Those are the things that make you who you are, and that's why if you figure out who you are and who you are authentically, that's how you can succeed. You get rich doing what you love. You get rich being yourself. There's you know that's the only thing you can do that nobody else knows how to do, to be honest. Being yourself. And so once we recognize who we are, or know who we are, and recognize our authenticity, then what we need to start doing is like, how do I insert the fullness of me within the spaces that I'm existing in? And once you figure that out, that's how you succeed.
Well, you bring up 2 points that I want to kind of comment on there. One is that I just sort of heard someone say that the word of the year for 2023 is authenticity. And I have to say, in my work in the arts and entertainment industry, because I worked a lot with screenwriters and authors and experts, and really what resonates with people, because bringing it full circle back to the arts, is authenticity. If it's what's the best art, what's the best story, it's the one where you bring your unique perspective. You tell your unique story. There's something that really grounds you to the material, whether it's a painting, whether it's a poem, whether it's a screenplay, a novel, anything that has to do with that sense of authenticity. I'll also add that you were talking about reading all kinds of books. I saw a great meme on a mug that had to do with debugging. And it says, debugging is like a murder mystery where you're trying to solve the crime, but you're also the murderer.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I agree. Although I feel like I'm the detective, that's right.
That's what I said. You are both the detective and the murderer. You're trying to solve the mystery
that you created.
And I think that that sense of authenticity, I think, is really, really important with whatever it is that you're studying, whatever you're exploring, whatever you're connecting. And the other thing I want to add to that is what really has the transformation that has happened. Again, in August of 2022, I fully stepped into this GIS, science program. And it was a stretch for me. I actually, even though I had great grades and I'd been at USC multiple times for both my undergraduate and a master's of arts degree, I was actually a little intimidated. Like, am I going to get accepted into a science program? And they were a little late at sort of accepting me, not for any personal reasons, just it was the end of, I was a late spring application, and they were sort of dealing with graduation and onboarding their summer students and things like that. So, but that was that imposter syndrome kind of popping up in me, like, hey, am I going to get this opportunity? I'm ready for it. I want it, but am I going to do it? And then they said, oh yeah, you're good. And I do feel like GIS was, because it's intersectional, it was a great place to sort of start, where there were no boundaries to, you can't do this because you don't have an undergraduate in math or undergraduate in hard sciences. And yet I get to be part of a program where there's a lot of people who have math or computer science or environmental science. I mean, there's just so many, or international relations, or like I come in with urban planning. Like, there's all of these different ways in which people kind of address the same kind of idea that we're doing spatial data science, and we're able to tell stories, which to me, back to the arts, but we're using data and maps to do it.
Yeah.
And then the applications for me, I'm very interested in intelligence. I'm very interested in disaster management. So you're talking about robots, and the fact that, you can dig through the rubble, not just with bare hands, but you can have robotics kind of help you with that. And so I'm very interested in the technology applications as related to disaster resilience, disaster management, climate impact, all of those kind of conversations, and just kind of that joy of exploration. But one of the very first things I did when I got into the program, and I was like, okay, now I'm in, now I've started, was I saw the Women Tech Makers Ambassador application. And I was like, hey, I really now own this identity. I'm a woman in tech. Let's do this. And I applied also for an ICCAE scholarship, which was really something that felt very outside of my identity at that time, which is an intelligence community scholarship. And I got it. The next thing I knew, I'm being mentored by the intelligence community. And now my whole sort of research track and studies have aligned with the intelligence community. And so now I'm a member of the AFC EA, which is the Armed Forces Communications and Electronics Association. And they have been super welcoming and supportive of my interest in wanting to apply spatial data science to GeoInt, so geospatial. And, just these tracks that you go on that you never could have imagined if not for community.
Yeah.
if not for this sense of belonging and
Hmm.
people making you feel welcome and people saying, you belong here. We want you here. We want to
Hmm.
help you here. Everybody who comes and joins me on my stage just affirms that this is something that has value and is worthwhile.
Yeah.
Everybody who comes and watches and shares in this content, I appreciate as well. And so we together are sort of building something. But I think this idea of a sense of belonging and a sense of community has been incredibly like grounded that transformation.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, if I was not a part of Women Tech Ambassador, where would I meet you? Like maybe we'll meet in California, but I'm in Florida, so it's that type of thing where community is very important. So if you think about robotics is a new field, pretty much those of us that's in there right now, we're just passionate about it, and the way we have been able to at least get things moving is by creating a community. I'm part of the Women in Robotics and part of Black in Robotics. I have a group of automated ladies that I work with all the time. We're sharing resources, and it's like something new, and there is no straightforward path. And I think this is the reason why I'm always like worried about schools saying, "Hey, you need math to be part of this," because I don't even know if there are rules for getting into humanities. If they say, "Oh, you need to have an art degree for you to be able to do any masters in humanity," I don't know if they have the same rules. I'll find that incredible. But because at the end of the day, when it comes to those areas where there's creativity, they give people so much freedom. When it comes to STEM, they're like, oh no, you gotta be here. And I find that sad because the degree of freedom that is given to any kind of object is what allows us to be as creative as possible, to be able to be innovative. And right now, with the advance of AI and LLM languages, nobody really knows what the future is going to hold. Who knows whose job is going to get on the chopping block, because AI can do it, because robots can do it. And I love that concept. I know a lot of people are afraid of it, but I love it because if you're a learner, you'll be excited. I feel like robots, at least the ones I would like to build, will be the ones replacing mundane tasks so that people can really chase their passions. Like, instead of us like, oh, I'm going to be going here, I'm moving this to here so that I can, earn salary. I'm like, no, I'm making enough money. Here's a basic income. Chase what you like, chase after the things that you're passionate about. Let's meet our basic Maslow triangle, you know, and you have your shelter, you have your food, and you're healthy, and then you can chase after your passion. That's the future I envisage. That's my utopia. That's my why. That's what drives me towards robotics. I'm not afraid of robots taking our job, or machine language replacing a lot of people, because I know that there's so much more inside of me that I just by being having a platform I can stand on. Like I see like LNM is coming up with ideas. I'm standing on that idea and I'm fleshing it out because I'm creative. So now we're coming to a point where creativity is so important, because machines can only do so much, but the humane part, the creativity part, the ability to do that comes from the arts, which is why I go back again and say STEM without arts is just vapor. You need steam. You really do need steam, because we don't know where the future is gonna go. Like you're mentioning, you're coming in with the skills, and it seems like you're the first in your time doing something like this, and before you know, we could have a whole curriculum existing at USC for people who want to merge, content creation with GIS. You never know, right? You never know what the future holds. And there've been careers in my time that have been in school and working that that have just gone away. They've been replaced by something. They're no longer viable, because new technology is coming out. So we have to move away from that mindset of, oh, you don't have math, you can't do STEM. That's crazy. How is it can we fix this gap here so that people can go into STEM without math? Is there an opportunity for them to learn math on as they're going? Is there an opportunity for them to get what they need, focus on what they need, without getting bogged down with all of the details in math that's not necessary for where they're trying to go? I feel like schools need to start thinking outside the box. Teaching has to change. The way people learn has to change, evolve with the times that we're existing in.
Yeah. And if they came to me and said, hey, you know, we do need you to like test on these things and meet a minimum passing score, I can independently study. I can figure it out. And there's more than enough resources available to me to get the knowledge. It just seemed like now I haven't talked to a person, I'm just kind of looking at what sort of is on the website, that they sort of said, you know, the application for this, you know, requires, you know, these undergraduate degrees. And that's where I felt like, oh, well, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of limiting as far as, because sometimes we don't come to these things until later, because sometimes what we choose as an undergrad degree is often a little bit more, maybe like I said, what our parents or immediate role models. And I didn't find certain things until later. I mean, even my undergrad, I did in international relations, but I didn't start as an international relations student. I knew I wanted to do film, and I actually ended up with a minor in film. But I started with English, and which is great. I like to read, and I love literature. But it was really when it was my first year, I did fine because it was all analysis. And then sometimes when you do things that you don't do well in, sometimes it really actually is an indication like I don't really belong here. And it was the art of the short story that really leveled me, because I could write a blog. I love writing blogs. I can write things that are connected more to sort of the real world than I'm not necessarily a novelist or a narrative fiction writer. That's just not, I love writing, I love reading, but I tend to like things that are sort of a little more grounded in history or science or other things. And so I would write things that were a little bit more like my day, and they're like, that's not a short story. And I just really struggled with that class. And it was really kind of the final straw of like, I just don't think I want to, you know, continue on this path. And it was a fellow student that I was talking to about his major in political science. And I was like, just not that interested in the US political system at that time, but I was like, I'm really interested in like the world political system. And then I very shortly after remembered that very pivotal conversation, someone mentioned international relations to me. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. A lot of reading, a lot of writing based on history, world, culture, geopolitics, all of this stuff. And I was like, I was studying war and poverty. And I was like, I'm in. And I took my first international relations class, and I was like, yep, this is it. This is what I want to do. And then it was decades later that I was like, ooh, urban planning sort of seems kind of interesting to me. But then a lot of the fellow students I had in my urban planning degree already had law degrees, business degrees, were licensed architects. And this was kind of like their icing on the cake. And for me, I was like, I kind of have this background in media marketing. What do I actually do with urban planning? And suddenly it was like, oh, I like this sort of GIS. I like this technology. I like these digital twins. I like this data science and data visualization. And I was like, that's where I want to go with this. And then now that I'm looking at geoint and intelligence and disaster recovery, disaster resilience, it all lays on top of that urban planning foundation.
Oh, nice.
So it's and to that sense, as kind of we wrap this up, I want to sort of say, you know, I am applying to things, but I'm now applying to things that I don't expect to get into. So there's something where you can sort of say, okay, it's nice to be affirmed when you apply for things and it feels good. But it's okay to apply for things, like you talk about failure, that you will never be considered for, but they're not going to consider you if you don't apply. So you might as well. Like I saw a thing for a FEMA fellowship, and I'm looking at all the past participants, and they're all run government agencies and the state management departments of all the various states, and they work for the US Senate. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to apply, because the one thing about being a student is your possibility, you can be anything. Mm-hmm. So they did seem like they had a few spots for graduate students. So I was like, you know what? I will bring my map making perspectives to the conversation if I'm invited to the table. Yeah. And that was one thing I applied for. Another one is I'm, applying for summer internships. I'm in my mid 40s, and yet I'm like, hey, internships, because you can do that when you're a grad student. Mm-hmm. And I'm applying for government agencies in DC for the summer. So who knows if I will get that or not. But I think at this point, I'm not, I applied for my first hackathon and entered my submission. And, we talk about vanity metrics sometimes. And I will say that no disrespect to them, but the group that organizes these hackathons put together, I thought, the most vanity metric round out of their year, and they're like, oh, we had like 25 or 100 participants over here and 1,700 participants over here, and look at us, we're doing really well. But when I looked at the hackathon that I entered, I was one of 7 entries, because the amount of people who enter versus the amount of people who express interest in entering is very different. And then the amount of people who were within my sort of niche of a category in sustainability was 7. And we get an equal prize as anybody who did, other themes. And so, it was my first one, probably not going to win that, but I'm proud of myself for playing. And so I think that you need to sort of raise your hand for things that are the things that you may get, but don't be afraid to raise your hand for things that, if you don't get it, no harm, nothing gained, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
That's right. Don't be afraid of failure. I wouldn't be the person telling myself no. I'm serious. I would be, I'm doing it. I'm not telling myself no. Let you have the opportunity to tell me no. Because I think most times a lot of women, they tell themselves no. Why are you telling yourself no? Before they even tell you no. And you just never know. And sometimes, let's say you put your resume out there, you apply for a job and you didn't get the job, but your resume out there. You never know what connections you make, or you go for an interview, you don't get the job, but you make some good connections. I've made some good connections during an interview. I've made some good connections just connecting with people randomly. So you never know. I don't think people should put themselves in a position to tell themselves no. But I know sometimes it's hard because you hear too many voices, and you hear too many people telling you things. But I'm not in the business of telling myself no. Let the rest of the world do that. I'm like, yes, you can do it. Yes, 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 yes. And what's the worst thing that will happen? They'll say no. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
And I think that's really important. And I think that comes to that back to, finding those communities and those tribes and apply. And a lot of them, require applications, and they're sort of gated communities for what, and that's okay. You'll find the ones that fit, and it's okay to just apply for things and just, not take it personally. And then eventually knowing that the right ones will sort of, line up for you. And it's, I don't know. I'm finding out this whole process like really, really joyful. And actually, even like with these interviews and AI, I have now figured out. So even though I say I'm still kind of learning editing, I've learned that I can, I do a podcast, so I can sort of strip out some of the audio and repurpose it there. I've learned that I can bring the audio file into Premiere Pro, and then 10 minutes later, I have a transcript. I can then bring that transcript and whatever information I have that you send me or that I find about you for your bio, I pop it into ChatGPT, and I said, here's kind of my notes and some of the things that they've sent me, and write me a bio based on the transcript. Yeah. And then the next thing I know, I have a blog, and next thing I know, I can ask it for sort of key highlights that I can then go back in and sort of clip. So I'm learning how to use these tools to, even though I'm a studio of one plus my guests, to really sort of optimize, maximize what I can do as I sort of lean into my, creative, my intersection of creative and STEM journey.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, if you can find a community, build one.
I think you mentioned it before, and I think that, a lot of us are working really hard to sit at tables that other people built, and sometimes you just have to build your own table.
Yeah. I'm working on this new technology. I'm still working around it, that I call community building with circular economy, where I want to have my community and building it where I know what I'm giving out, and I know what I'm taking in. And I'm going to build another connection with someone who is going to be taking in and giving away. And we're going to connect all the dots until we create a circular economy where everybody feeds everybody, and it's just in there. We're going to have a front office, but the back engine is going to be us. So if I create this community because I don't fit in anywhere, it's something I can do. This is what I do. This is my STEAM Divas. This is where we're trying to go. Where is the pipeline of the girls I'm creating going into? I'll connect to that community. and where am I going to get girls to come in that I can build? I connect to that community, and then we just keep going further until we have a full blown community. And I think that is secular, and expand it as much as we can. And I have a plan in mind, and I have something I'm doing. But this is just the highlight of what I'm going into. If you're on a table, or you're trying to get on the table and they don't let you in, build yours. That's what I do. I build like the back here. That's my lab. I build a lot of stuff there. I have my equipments over here. I have everything I need. I can build anything I want at home. So if you're not allowed into any space, create it.
I
We're all
love that.
creators.
So as we wrap up, what kind of last kind of words, advice, or call to action do you have for our viewers?
Oh, awesome. I'm hoping that you all heard everything I was saying, but I would say that one of the things I would say is be authentic. Find out who you really are and be your authentic self always, because that's what we need. And whenever you express your authentic self, be aware of the environment and don't change yourself to fit into the environment. So basically, rebuild it. Also, be comfortable with failure. Fail fast, get to root cause, implement corrective actions.